can assist to protecting the heritage, not only immovable but also movable museum collections, and how actually can these values in international organizations can be a useful technique, a useful mechanism for protection of this cultural heritage. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hargui. And I'm really thankful you found some time. I know you're busy with your conference, so I'm glad you were able to join us. And I hope you can stay for the Q&A session. I know you're very tight, but I hope you find a few minutes to participate. So just for our participants here, please continue putting your questions in the chat box. We're going to get to them at the end. And I just want to remind you, just in case you know that the third panel in this series will be taking place next Saturday, and that one is gonna now shift directions. It's gonna look at the role of organizations and society writ large on these issues. So that's gonna be next week. And I also want to remind you that the whole session is being recorded and it's going to be made available. So now I'm going to go to our fourth panelist this morning, and that's Nerses Kopalyan. So Nerses, in your article, which is titled Between Security, Technology, and Innovation, this is a very key issue, by the way. I've learned this the hard way in the Pentagon over 2 decades. The role of the social sciences in strengthening Armenia's security architecture. And you state emphatically that Armenia cannot have security without technology development and innovation, which is absolutely correct. But at the same time, it also cannot address its security problems without the support of the social sciences. And you go on to describe in detail the closed loop synergy between these 3 key elements, namely security, technology, and the social sciences. So it's a very important concept and such. And you conclude by stating, Armenia faces a security dilemma that is more acute than the security dilemma inherent to most small states and cannot cogently address these questions without the support of the social sciences. Very important topic. And let me just say one example to you to tell you how important it is. I was working day and night, working the counterinsurgency and the ISIS thing in Iraq. I was very much at the time, this is like we're talking over a decade ago now, plus it was a lot of hardware orientation, working day and night. And then a good friend of mine, a General Votel, was landed in Washington from Baghdad, and I went to see him right away. I said, Joe, what do you need? He looked at me, and they called me Doc in the Pentagon. He says, Doc, I got all the hardware and technology I need. What I lack is understanding what's going on the ground. And that to me was a wake-up call, because I realized, wow, we were missing a big issue in all this. So Nerses, your topic is absolutely relevant. It's going to remain relevant. Please go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hriar. I appreciate it. It's actually your experience is kind of similar to some of the stuff that I'm doing, but at a much smaller scale. In Armenia, we are right now developing a new security architecture, and I'm involved in a process as an academic advisor. And indeed, there's a certain disconnect between sort of military experts or those who know development in a specific sphere, but bridging the gap between security and technology, and in security in the social sciences, and security and governance, and technology and governance are relatively new spheres in Armenia. And so it is a work in progress. And I do appreciate you creating this platform with ARPA for it to be addressed and discussed. Indeed, there is a vacuum in the conceptual structuration of Armenia's growth as a tech country. We see that the role of the social sciences, and more importantly, political science and security studies, are missing. Now, these important fields purposefully been left out, but rather they have not caught up to accommodate sort of the growth that we're seeing in the technology culture. Why is this important? Well, because the social sciences can exponentially strengthen and support technological development and innovation in Armenia by actually offering the tools, governance models, policy-making capabilities, and the general contours of functionality between technology and society. And so understanding that security is not simply specific to physical security or hard power capabilities, soldiers and weaponry, but that's a big part of it. It's not simply defined by that. We see that the role of social sciences in offering solutions and guidance to the synchronization of technological growth with comprehensive security and resiliency modeling is quite crucial. And this is precisely what Armenia is doing right now. We are developing a comprehensive security doctrine with heavy emphasis on resiliency. But for this to work, the role and the marriage of technology, innovation, and security becomes fundamental. And so in the domain of support, the social sciences remain quite fundamental in underpinning the role of technology and innovation in enhancing Armenia's security capabilities. Because as I noted, Armenia actually, aside from developing a new security architecture, it's in the process of kind of formulating three different approaches. First, many of you are familiar with this. Armenia is in the nascent stages. It's in the initial stages of developing a domestic weapons industry. And this inherently assumes the intertwining of technology and security. Second, we see that while a military-industrial complex is being formed, the processes, the government procedures, and the policies are also in the process of being formed. How is this going to happen when you don't have sufficient learning from the social sciences to support the development of sort of best practices, learned modeling, and procedure development? And third, while technological innovation and the private IT sector have been sort of leading the drive in Armenia in marrying technology with security, at the end of the day, for this endeavor to work, right, you need sort of the functional, the cogent involvement of state institutions. You need the correct involvement of the pertinent organs of state within the security architecture. And for this to happen, for all of this to be conducive to collaboration and coordination, you need the knowledge, research, and sort of the broader support of the social sciences to accommodate this. And so collectively, what we're seeing is that for us to be able to enhance Armenia's security architecture through the maximization of technological capabilities, the large body of research and knowledge from political science, from security studies, must be applied to ensure both the long-term and sort of the short-term security success of the process that we're undertaking. And so when we look at the realm of governance, we understand that Armenia has this post-Soviet legacy. We understand that until the Velvet Revolution and up to 2020, Armenia's institutions remained underdeveloped and closed. And so governance and governance modeling remain limited. So while technology and innovation might be exceeding expectations and do an exceptional job, if governance and quality of state institutions are not commensurate with technological growth and innovation, synchronization is going to be a problem. And this is where the social sciences come in, right? Because the research and the learning and the best practices that they bring in with respect to governance, policymaking, institutional configurations, all of these remain fundamental in supporting and allowing a bridge to be built between these two relatively separate but highly necessary realms to function in order to advance Armenia's security needs. So within the confluence of democratization, democratic consolidation, and Armenia's security dilemma, all of these require the integration of numerous things that we're talking about. Okay, we need the integration of comprehensive security, intersocietal security, right? Small state resiliency, and of course, Armenia's capacity to deal in or to deter hybrid warfare, which we've been subjected to both from Azerbaijan and Russia. All of these conceptual models also require important components in order for these to be successfully implemented, and that's technology and innovation. So Armenia could not have a healthy security architecture, both at the civil level, societal level, the governmental level, and overarchingly, if we don't have a very cogent and a functional relationship between that domain and the technology domain. So Armenia's security cannot be separated from its innovative potential. And for this reason, the successful of this larger endeavor of developing an overarching comprehensive security architecture requires the role of the social sciences. And so to kind of wrap up, I don't want to speak too extensively. Four important questions come up that when we answer these, we could understand the importance of social sciences in addressing and basically synchronizing innovation and technology, right? So how could technology, for example, how could technology innovation enhance Armenia's hybrid and dehybridization capabilities? So we study hybrid warfare and dehybridization through political science, through security studies, through modeling that we have within the realm of the social sciences. But then technology and innovation, right, can step in to enhance and basically advance our capabilities. What role can technology play? And Scott kind of touched up on this, right, in giving Armenia asymmetrical advantages against Azerbaijan. We study asymmetry and Azerbaijan's power capabilities and power disparity through the social sciences. But the role of technology in puncturing or giving Armenia the ability to asymmetrically engage, right, requires the marriage of two. And furthermore, when we talk about developing Armenia's deterrence capabilities, technology is going to be one of the pillars of this, right? So we can develop all of the technological capabilities, but if our deterrence modeling, if our deterrence doctrine and policies are not well developed without the use of the social sciences, there will be incommensurability. And so in the end, right, we understand that, yes, Armenia is trying to establish peace. We understand that in whatever iteration, Armenia's neighbor doesn't want peace. But even if it agrees to whatever it eventually agrees to, we are still expecting persistent and low intensity conflict. And so how can technology and innovation allow Armenia to function and progress while also mitigating its security problems? And so what happens is through social sciences, through security studies, through political science modeling, we can develop policies and practices. And then innovation and technology, right, could step in and basically merge with this process in enhancing Armenia's security architecture. So overarchingly, to wrap up, the relationship, the marriage remains fundamental because you can't have one without the other. And when we look at successful cases of small state security development, whether it's in the Baltics or the Nordics, they have precisely done that. Armenia has done an exceptional job in technology innovation growth. We have lagged in security development. Why? Because of our underdevelopment in security studies and the social sciences. So I'll stop at this right now.
Well, thank you, Nerses. Very, very important topic. I recommend all of you online and others who will listen to this later is to really read his article and also the other articles. They're very substantive and very relevant to the situation Armenia finds itself in these days. So please continue submitting your questions. So now we're gonna, by the way, I want to remind everybody it's being recorded, and the recording will be made available by Hagop when he sends out the notices. And also remind you that the third session, again, I'm repeating myself, is role of organization and society writ large. It's next Saturday, again, 10 o'clock Pacific time. And we have a set of again, just like today, a set of very well-known authors who provided articles, and they're included in the volume that Hagop has sent out. So now, please continue submitting your questions. That's what we're going to go to now. I'm going to go through them in the sequence they came in. So there's a question from iPhone. I don't know who was at the end of the iPhone, but there's a good question for any of the panelists. At the margin, and this is the question, at the margin, should we spend, say, $5 to $10 million over the next 5 years on additional technology or political lobbying? Who wants to go first? And then others can chime in. So, Nerses, you want to take this on?
Sure, I have some knowledge of this. Investments in technology are exponentially increasing. So 5 to 10 million is nothing. When you look at Armenia's military budget, we're right now at 1.3 billion. And so technological investment is a big part of it because you cannot separate modern weapon systems from technology. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that Scott discussed, which we can't publicly discuss, but there's a lot of investments in that. As far as political lobbying, Armenia, for example, has hired lobbying firms in Europe and the UK. The former Secretary General of NATO, Rasmussen, is one of the more well-known one. But there are other minor lobbying efforts and processes going on within the domain of security or security lobbying in Europe. In the United States, that has not happened. There's interest, but we see that the relationship that Armenia's ambassador to the U.S., Lilith Makuns, has with the State Department, which is exceptionally close, and the relation that's been developing with the DoD, where Hriar used to be at, these are kind of suggesting that the inroads that are being made do not necessarily require Armenia hiring lobbying organizations in the US yet. But I think they will come to the point where we will need to hire something in the United States, specifically when it comes to arms procurement, because that is a very complex process that advanced lobbying firms deal with. That's kind of most of the information I could share at the moment.
Well, thank you. Anybody else? Any other panelists want to chime in?
If I could just jump in real quick, and this is exactly why you do a needs assessment, right? What do you need? Where is it? How do you go and get it? And that helps drive your budgeting, right? Having a budget and then seeing how to spend it is kind of backwards, right? So in my humble opinion, I would say this points us back, and frankly, partly the next question too, this points us back to the importance of that needs assessment. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Now, anybody else? Okay, please raise your hand, the panelists, if you want to chime in. So next one is Michel Davoudian. And he's asking, what about the civil defense? Some organizations are working on that important component of a defense system, especially in the case of Armenia. Azatazen, for instance, doing a great job, has a strategy, plan, etc. So who would like to address that question, comment from Michel Davoudian?
I think that kind of falls in my area. So when we talk about the whole comprehensive security doctrine that is being developed, the civil defense is a big part of it. CSO, civil society organizations, the private sector, corporations are going to be part of it. This is very similar to the model that we've seen in Finland and Estonia. And so civil defense is a big part of the comprehensive security doctrine that's being developed. There's attention to it. It's not fully developed, but it's a big part of the consideration. Also, when we talk about civil defense in Armenia, there's a broader understanding of that. You have seen, for example, the formation of what some call, local defense forces or paramilitary forces, things of that sort. Recently, Armenia formalized the development of territorial defense forces, and all these organizations are going to be integrated into an institutionalized structure where local communities in the border areas will have these civil defense forces and sort of volunteer battalions that are integrated into the armed forces. Very common what the Poles have been doing. They played a very big important role with the Ukrainian initial efforts in staving the Russian invasion, so on and so forth. So there is a fusion of both a broader whole of society approach, which qualifies some of the civil defense components, and a whole of government approach. In general, in Armenia, we always think security as whole of government, no longer. So when we do talk about resiliency or comprehensive security modeling, whole of society and civil defense is an important part of that. So that is now part of the military thinking and the doctrine with respect to security.
Thank you, Nerses. Scott or anybody else, you want to add anything?
Just concur with Nerses.
Fantastic. Okay. Concurrence is always good. So,
thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So next we have a question from Hovannes Mardirosyan. And Scott, this is a question to you. So Hovannes says, strategic neutrality alignment seems Pashinyan's stance, not leaning to the West, not staying faithful to Russia. So he's asking, is that helpful to the security without provoking adversaries? Scott, over to you.
Yeah, and that's the hard question. And so Russia has demonstrated they're not a reliable partner. No one else has really stepped up to demonstrate, a major country has stepped up to demonstrate that they are a reliable partner, or, international organization like the EU or NATO. So there really isn't anyone. And so lacking that, you essentially have to do this, right? You have to have some level of neutrality. You may have stronger affinity for one group or one nation over another, but you really do need, given the lack of Russia or someone of that level, to be able to help guarantee your security. You have, in many ways, no choice but to take a neutral stance. That's why in the article and then earlier in the conversation, I mentioned something about trying to increase security assistance from China. Also in the article, I talk about Israel, in addition, of course, to the typical large providers, Russia, the US, et cetera. Like, wherever you can get it, you need to go get it, and maintaining neutrality so you can don't inadvertently prevent something before you even get a chance to try and get it. In many ways, seems the only choice. It's not having a lot of good choices and choosing the best one. It's having some relatively limited poor choices and choosing not quite the least worst, but the best of what your options are. If that hopefully explains that.
Great answer, Scott. Thank you. So the next question is from Garo, and this is for Robert and Haigui.
Yeah.
So here's what he's asking. So let me read it, Haigui, and then we'll turn it over to you. How to make the heritage evidence useful and effective to stop the destruction of Armenian culture when it has failed in historical Armenia and Nakhichevan. Azerbaijan is following the footsteps and successes of its big brother in wiping out the memory of Armenian existence. Harsh question, but I think it's something we need to face. Over to you, Haigui.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Garo, for this very difficult question, actually, because how to make that Azerbaijan will stop somehow the cultural heritage destruction. This is very difficult because the heritage destruction is not just it is on purpose. So it has a really a very detailed and discussed purpose of just, erasing the footsteps of Armenians living in the territory. Because if you have territorial claims, the heritage becomes an obstacle for you to legitimize your being there, you're occupying the territories. So if there is no Armenian, there should be no footsteps in this. But of course, heritage is a part of our identity, cultural identity, ethnic identity, and also culture is very important soft power in cultural diplomacy. What should do Armenia in order not to fail as it was in Nakhichevan and also in, as you mentioned already, Western Armenia? Actually, it is on the process of again failing because what we are seeing, witnessing the erasure of Armenian heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh is something that we want to prevent, that we apply to international organizations to speak up about it. UNESCO and European Commission, other international organizations, and everyone, the scientific community, to speak about it and to stop this erasure of Armenian heritage over Nagorno-Karabakh. In Nagorno-Karabakh, it isn't working. Why? Because the Nagorno-Karabakh is unrecognized state, and UNESCO and these kind of conventions, declarations, international organizations, all have been created after the World War II, and they consider heritage as a state property, and the state is the owner of the property according to these conventions. And in this case, these international organizations somehow useless in this case. What we need to know that we need to cite and to reference to those conventions and those organizations which deal with the community. Community has the right to culture, and community has the right to create the culture on the territory where he's living. And in this case, we need to find really good, as I mentioned already in the beginning of answering Hriar's questions, that we need technology, we need interdisciplinary researches, not only historians, not only cultural heritage managers or researchers need to be engaged in this, but also IT sector, I don't know, a lot of new technologies, AI, everything should be a kind of interdisciplinary heritage in order to find the mechanism how to prevent, how to speak, and how to show these cases. Because after November 9, the ceasefire 2020, actually it was euphoria, and Azerbaijani soldiers were destroying all this heritage. They were shooting and putting on the media, so it was available also to see what they are doing. And now they are a kind of cautious, or their policies a kind of if we don't have these satellite imageries, it is hard to know what's going on there. Just although just recently they totally destroyed the Gana Jami Shushi, totally destroyed. At first they declared as Russian Orthodox Church, not Armenian, and then they decided that it's better to destroy physically. And there is no any announcement, no any sanction, no any caution to Azerbaijan by the UNESCO or by other organizations. So in this case, what we need to do, again, to publish about Armenian heritage of Nagorno-Karabakh in a good qualified journals, articles, to write books, to participate in a lot of international conferences to speak about it. But it can prevent the heritage erasure in Nagorno-Karabakh? I don't think so. And this is really very difficult question to answer. And this is ongoing process that every day we deal with it. Every day we try to speak about a case of vandalism that Azerbaijan deals in Nagorno-Karabakh. I don't know if I answered to your question. If it's okay, if you have more questions, feel free to email me later as well.
Of course, I agree with my colleague. Unfortunately, yes, the destruction of Armenian cultural heritage is in continuous process, and we cannot stop this process. All we have to do is speak about it and spread this information in the world. And what can stop the Azerbaijani authorities from this vandalism? In my opinion, only international sanctions. I cannot offer any other option at this moment.
Okay, thank you much. And by the way, I'm going to read the questions because I think when this is recorded, people are going to see it afterwards, are not going to see the chat box. So I apologize. Some of these questions are very, by the way, very pertinent. And so, but I'm going to read them. This is from Robert Abedisian. Thank you for the timely and important discussion. This is for Scott. That is over to you. Dr. Fisher, thank you for dedicating your time and expertise to the issues of concern for our nation. You mentioned needs assessment, which is a crucial component. You covered mostly the military aspect of countering Azerbaijan. At the same time, you mentioned Turkey as a stakeholder. Indeed, Turkey has been helping Azerbaijan not only with training and weapon acquisition, but also with putting boots on the ground to ethnically cleanse Artsakh. I think you can agree that it is hard to imagine Armenia possessing military capacity to counterbalance Azerbaijan's big brother. So he goes on to say, how would you assess the importance of the international political component of reinforcing national security and resilience of Armenia? Question. We can agree that this inaction and a departure from the political commitment by the international community to safeguard Armenian lives in Artsakh from genocidal attacks has sent a negative signal to our nation. Russia's game in the region is clear. We now see we now see a rapid international of multilateral ties between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. How about the collective democratic West? Long question, Scott. I think you can handle it. Over to you.
But this is important. This really gets to the heart of the matter. And it's reductionist, but it's, I'll be reductionist and then I'll expand. And so how about the collective democratic West? The two words I would use would be depressing and unreliable. It gives me no pleasure in saying that, but I think to the extent you rely on the West, using the term from the question, the collective democratic West, it could be dangerous. I don't foresee a situation where the US, for example, or NATO or the EU has the same level of commitment to the region that the countries who are already in the region have to it, or Russia or others who've traditionally been involved in the region. So ideally, yes, you would be able to convince the US, NATO, the EU, some subset of countries within those groups to come and help Armenia's security, but I don't see that happening. I don't see a realistic case where that happens. It gives me, again, no pleasure to say that. I just don't see that happening. So then it gets back, and this is to the asymmetry that Nerses talks about, is what can Armenia do, and how does it leverage the tools, the unique capabilities that it has compared to the other countries in the region to prepare itself against some of the threats in the region. So to the extent you can get help from the West, great, do it. You have to. You have a few other choices, but to the extent you rely on it, I think that could be dangerous. And I'm not just from study. I spent some time at US European Command a little over a year ago, a fair amount of time there, almost a year there. And in the US DoD, Department of Defense perspective, the Caucasus are a part of European Command, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, obviously. Those are considered part of US European Command, which is how the DoD views the world. There was little to no interest. The few times I would reference Armenia, this is in 2022 for the most part, very little interest, knowledge of, concern for, and this is in a part of the DoD that is by definition required to, or is responsible for helping the US understand and react to events that are taking place in the world. So both from study and from seeing inside things to a minor extent, I have very little confidence that relying on the US or other American partners like NATO and the EU would be advisable. Hriar, you've seen this at a Pentagon level, so I'll defer to your knowledge on some of this, but that's my somewhat depressing take on it.
Oh, I can second that. 2 decades I spent in the Joint Staff in the planning. I worked with UCOM, you mentioned that European Command. South Caucasus never got up on the radar screen, never did. For 2 decades I was there. So you're absolutely correct. All right, so let's move on. And please keep sending your questions, very interesting. Sosi has a question again to you, Scott. Israel is not an option for Armenia, and so far Armenia doesn't have security cooperation with China. It is also not an easy country for Armenia. Unfortunately, I missed your presentation. Oh, she missed you. And maybe you mentioned it, but the main strategic partners in defense are India and France. Iran would be an option, if not the problem between the West and Iran, which Armenia takes into consideration when it comes to that kind of cooperation with Iran. EU has approved its first measure from peace facility for Armenia, which will hopefully open the door for further measures, but it will be only only non-lethal. As for Israel, it has irreversible advanced strategic cooperation with Azerbaijan, supplying 70% of its weapons and getting 40% of its oil, if not too late. If it is too late for Armenia to try to get Israel as a partner. Armenia needs to try to have some strategic partnership with the U.S. in security security area. A lot of material in there. Scott, over to you, and then maybe Nerses and others may want to chime in. Go ahead, Scott.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I add the question because the question is missing there. So basically, I would say that is it possible that the US convinces Israel from stopping supplying armaments to Azerbaijan, because basically Israel is Azerbaijan's #1 armament supplier. So Armenia's issue is not to get weapons from Israel, which is, I think, not possible at this point of the time. It could be possible 10 years ago, but unfortunately we have missed this train. But the issue is how to persuade Israel not to supply this crazy amount of armaments to Azerbaijan, which I believe can be done only through the US.
Scott, you wanna?
Okay.
Scott?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll dive on in. So it's the questioner Sossi. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question, and highlights the key. There's the positive and there's the negative. So the positive is Armenia getting whatever military or other capabilities from Israel. That is largely off the table, and in the short term is unlikely to reappear on the table. The flip side of that is reducing, kind of the negative approach, reducing what Israel gives to Azerbaijan. That is more possible. The idea that the US is going to use its influence to do this, I think is, and this gets back to the previous question, just general lack of US interest in the region, especially compared to US interest in Israel. So if it happened, that would be very helpful and nice and pleasant for Armenia, but I don't foresee that happening anytime in the short term. But that doesn't mean that Armenia can do nothing. And this gets back again to what Nerses said and what was mentioned earlier on. And this is kind of that information and technological tools that Armenia has, to the extent that you can make Azerbaijan toxic, to the extent you can highlight the ethnic cleansing, to the extent that you can highlight all the negative things that Azerbaijan is doing to make them a very difficult, unseemly, unsightly country to work with, that will then help you lower the amount or make it easier for a country like the US or others to get out and say to Israel or say to others, you need to reduce your support for Azerbaijan. It's not a guarantee, it's not a high possibility, a high likelihood event, but it is a possibility. And it's not even an expensive or frankly that difficult one in terms of what needs to be done, but it needs to be done. And so using tools of asymmetry, using asymmetry and some of the specific information tools to highlight some of the toxic behavior of the Azeris, I think is a way to get towards this. But if I'm betting on whether or not it's going to work, I'm not giving very good odds. Again, I'm not trying to be depressing. That's just how I see it. But
Yeah.
Nerses, you may have.
Yeah, just quickly chiming in. I've had these conversations with state and defense in the U.S. We know that the United States tried to get Israel to stop arming Israel during the 2020 war. Israel to Azerbaijan. It didn't work. And so this isn't the hill that the United States is willing to die on when it comes to pressuring Azerbaijan. This has just been Israel. This has kind of been an issue. Also, in the broader security architecture of how this is qualified, we can't forget the Iran factor. The United States, and to a large extent Israel, considers the arming of Azerbaijan as a potential buffer against Iran. And so in their thinking, these weapons, while Armenia fears it's going to be used against us, and it has been used against Armenia, from their lens, these are also designed to potentially be a form of a deterrence or a containment of Iran. So when you look at the broader regional architecture from that lens, they don't see the same problems that Armenia sees. So their perspective is a little different. I highly doubt, unless you have an administration that's able to, exert enough influence on Netanyahu, which isn't going to happen. Israel's not going to stop at that because it's in their strategic interest to continue that relationship, and they're not going to, curtail that or allow it to be obstructed for anything.
Thank you, Nerses. Scott, anything else you want to add, or are you good?
No, I think I'm good for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, then let's go on. Garo has a short, quick question here. Okay, well, maybe one of you will want to address it. How did the Jews use their historical heritage 2,000 years later? I think I know where he's coming from, but who wants to take that on? Anybody? That's we can spend the whole session on that one question. So, Garo, I think you may want to go directly maybe to one of the panelists and see if you can get him to address that. So let's move on. We have Huri Elezian, and she has a good question. Many Armenians are now disinterested in democracy and becoming more and more convinced that we were better off remaining as before. No Western value country demonstrated that democracy mattered. What do you say to that? Anyone? So that's it.
I'll quickly chime in. I don't agree with the framing of the question because the empirical evidence doesn't support it. We've seen consistent public surveys come out the last year minimum, and I'm not even going before that, that demonstrates Armenian society's support for democracy. So there might be a handful, or there might be certain media outlets in the diaspora that perpetuate this thinking, but democracy, democratic culture in Armenia is actually very, very robust, and all the survey data supports this. I also don't see any evidence the way things were before, because when we look at all the data that comes out, Armenians actually view Russia as to be the biggest problem in its security architecture, right? Armenian society, over 66-70% now consider Russia to be an enemy. Well, going back before entails returning to Russia's authoritarian orbit, and Armenian society rejects that. So there is no empirical or observable evidence to suggest that is the case. As far as the values of Western democracies, Armenia became a democracy for itself, not for Western countries. And so, when we look at what Western countries can do for Armenia, that's a different subject of conversation. Armenian society organically undertook the Velvet Revolution to establish freedoms that are indigenous to Armenian political culture. So I don't think tying security with democracy works. And, in 2021, when the elections happened, this was the actual question, right? Security or democracy? And Armenian society overwhelmingly voted for democracy, assuming that the framing of security, which really isn't the case because we saw the Russian security architecture collapse, that returning to the past would produce security. That really hasn't been the case. So I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that large swaths of Armenian society are disinterested in democracy. It's actually the opposite. And when we look at Armenia's democracy rankings, freedom of speech rankings, internet freedom rankings, they dominate the entire post-Soviet space. So the evidence suggests otherwise, I would say.
Thank you, Nerses. In fact, Sosi adds, she says, most Armenians in Armenia are pro-democracy, so she agrees. She agrees with you. Actually, and she just added, actually, Freedom House. I was working for them in Armenia 2021, conducted research debunking the false narrative on security versus democracy. And Huri chimes in. She says, "Thank you, Nerses and Sosi." So I think we've come to the end. This has been a lot to absorb. I hope that all those who attended it learned quite a bit out of it. If you want to reach out to any of the panelists with any additional questions, you could come to me or go to Hagop, and we will put you in touch with the panelists, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to address any additional questions you have. I just want to remind you that this has been recorded, and Hagop will be sending it out, the recording, to everybody. So it will go all over the world. Just want to remind you again that panel 3, the series of 3 panels, is next Saturday, same time, 10 o'clock Pacific time. And we have that's the role of organizations and society writ large. And we have David Agopian, and we have ARPA Balyan, Professor Balyan from AUA, Angela Balkayan, and then Armen Ghazarian, former president of AUA, and of course our own Hagop Panosyan, and they're going to be dealing with several very interesting topics. So thank you all. Let me ask the panelists, any final comments you want to make before we close the session? It's been 90 minutes, so anything else?
Thank you for having me. Pleasure meeting everyone, and yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Wishing everybody a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you very
all
much.
panelists. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Hagop, any closing remarks?
Thank you very much, the panelists, and also Hriar. And we hope that you will join us on November 9th, which is next Saturday at 10 a.m. And also, if you like what ARPA is doing, please donate. We need your money. We need your help. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Great. See you all. Bye.
Thank you.